Welcome back to Sabres Chat, everybody. I am your host, Luka, of course, and been a couple weeks and everything like that, and hopefully you all enjoyed the last episode where I kind of gave a bit of a wrap up on the off season for the rest of the Atlantic Division. And I'm not going to waste a lot of time here. I'm going to jump ahead right to it, and we're going to do something like last episode where I kind of just gave a that breakdown that I mentioned of the other teams in the Atlantic Division, and instead look at the other division within the Eastern Conference, as it still is in direct relation with the Sabres, maybe not as much when it comes to competing for a division in the Sabres sense, but they still have to compete against these teams more than once in the season and will be up in the standings with them trying to secure a wild card spot if they're not able to compete for one of those three divisional spots. So this is a night where I'm going to go into everything with the Metro and just kind of give a general overview of how their off seasons have gone, what the teams look like, kind of how I feel about the roster that's been put together by those front offices, and what it means for the Sabres and everything like that. And essentially give you also, excuse me, where I feel they stand among these teams, and kind of just give you a general understanding of, you know, are they going to be able to compete with the Carolina Hurricanes and the likes of them? Or maybe the Carolina Hurricanes are still kind of where they're at. How am I feeling about the Sabres when it comes to the relationship or the, competitiveness with the Islanders and where they currently sit with their roster and everything? Just that whole fun. And I mentioned the first team we're going to go. This is going to be an alphabetical order thing. This is not going to be how I feel the division is going to break down. But the first team, if you are going in alphabetical order, is those Carolina Hurricanes I mentioned just before. They finished first in their division, second in the conference, Eastern Conference overall, with 113 points last season. I'm going to do something similar to the last episode as well, where in the arrivals, they had defenseman Dmitry Orlov via free agency from Boston. He signed a 2-year, $15.5 million deal. Forward Michael Bunting, a guy that I kind of even liked and was kind of targeting a little bit, or hoping that the Sabres were targeting, because I like a lot of the skill set that he brings. He ends up in Carolina via free agency on a 3-year, $13.5 million deal. And then another notable guy that they brought in, although I don't know if he will crack the roster or not, is forward Brendan Lemieux via free agency from Philly on a 1-year, essentially vetman contract, $800,000. The departures, they did have a few. Left winger Max Pacioretty, he left via free agency. We will be talking about him later, or at least we'll be mentioning him later. He went to Washington. Defenseman Shane Gostisbehere, I talked about him last episode. He then left via free agency to go to Detroit. Defenseman Calvin DeHaan, he left via free agency to go to Tampa Bay. And then winger Jesse Pulivari, who they acquired at the deadline, he is still a free agent at this time. He is not back with the Hurricanes last I have checked. Overall, based on those incomings and outgoings, you can kind of understand that it really seems like uh, a quality amount of ins and outs, where they essentially lost a left winger, a top six left winger in Pacioretty, and they bring in a Michael Bunting. They lost a defenseman in Gostisbehere. Also, Dehan is notable, but Gostisbehere is kind of really the top, when you're talking about your six defensemen, the more noteworthy one. And they bring in a Dmitry Orlov, honestly, an improvement from Gostisbehere. And then, they're just going to run it back. And I don't see anything wrong with that. I think Carolina, the strength of the team overall is the team unit itself, and they have something that's good there. And then Rod Brendamore has been a phenomenal coach in this league. He's been doing a great job in Carolina for years, and he has something going right now with this team that it makes a lot of sense that you just make a couple moves. Michael Bunting, I think, will be great in that top six area that they're probably going to slide him into. Dmitry Orlov, right now, I believe he's technically on the third line, blue line, but I imagine he will be a top four guy for them based on how he played last season, both in Washington and then after the deadline with Boston, where he actually even seemed to have gotten better. Um, they're just a very impressive team. The interesting part for this team, and kind of the big thing to watch, is goaltending and then how they play, because the most fascinating thing about this team and with the Hurricanes is that both Ranta and Freddie Anderson were free agents, and they opted to re-sign and run it back with the team as well, both of them. And Ranta is kind of an interesting thing because when Frederick Anderson went down, Ranta did a very good job kind of filling in for him and even maybe in a way playing just as well as him, if not better at times. And there was a real question on who is the number one, who's the real one. And I think in the playoff times, it allowed for a quick leash to be pulled if you wanted to switch to another guy. And then the question was always there. So with both of them coming back when it was understandable that it seemed like maybe one or the other would go, and then they would just lean on one of them to be a one and figure out the backup role from there. You have both of them back. It's interesting to see that dynamic. It'll be interesting to see who Brendan Moore kind of gives the nod with opening night. I'm going to guess Anderson just because he has been the one for them in the past, at least, of course, early on to start the season. But I also wouldn't be surprised if Ranta maybe wins the job very quickly into the season and becomes the number one moving forward as well. Just a fascinating dynamic. I find it interesting. It's a very good team, though. There's not a whole heck of a lot to talk about this team, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, of course. My prediction for them is to win the Metro once again. I think they are the cream of the crop in the Metro. I don't think it's like what I was talking about with the Atlantic, where I really think Toronto kind of is above everyone else, and it's somewhat notable and sizable in a difference. I think, other teams I'm going to talk about tonight are there with Carolina. I just think Carolina has the ability to sustain success throughout the season better than all the other teams in the division. And that in turn should allow them to get the extra few points they will need to once again win the division. I have them around the 50 to 55 win mark. Once again, I believe that's where they were before. I think they were at 52 wins, and that should put them hopefully around the 115 point mark. They will probably win the division. The first time the Sabres are playing them is Tuesday, November 7th at Carolina. I think Carolina is just an extremely tough matchup for the Sabres. And this is a team that, if I were to go, I think the Sabres this season, of course, should be able to stack up against anyone, but Carolina is going to be one of those games are going to be those games throughout the season where I would love to take points from, and obviously I want to see them compete with them. They should be able to compete with them. I just think it's a bad matchup for them as well. I think they're so cohesive as a team unit from lines 1 through 4 in the forward depth and then 1 through 3 in the defenseman depth that they just get everything they need to out of there. Rod Brendamore does a phenomenal job with the system that he runs there. And overall, I'm not expecting the Sabres to be at the level of the Carolina Hurricanes, but that's also okay with me because I do respect them as a team. I respect how they play, especially in the regular season, of course, because they have found sustained success in the past few seasons now, and there's a reason for it. So overall, I don't necessarily expect the Sabres to be at their level, of course, of the Hurricanes. I don't expect them to kind of be a team that should be a true coin flip with the Hurricanes, but they should still be able to compete with them. It'd be nice to take a game from them, but we'll see the first time, like I said, November 7th at Carolina. We will see definitely how the Sabres stack up after a few weeks into the season and where they stand with one of the best in the East. So that is them. And going from the best in the East to the worst in the East last season, that would be your Columbus Blue Jackets. And that will be the next team I talk about tonight. They finished, of course, 8th in the division, last in the conference with a total of 59 points. Couldn't even hit the 60 mark. They didn't have a lot of moves. It's very fascinating to me. There's only 3 notable things that really happened for this team this season. And the first and foremost one is they drafted 3rd overall center Adam Fantilli out of Michigan. They then also, although I think I don't know if the timeline fits, but what I have written down in my notes is Adam Fantilli first, and then they trade for Damon Severson from New Jersey for a 2023 third. Well, I guess that would have had to happen before because it was obviously involving a 2023 pick. And then they also traded. This was also prior because there is a 23 pick involved, but they traded for Ivan Provorov from Philadelphia as part of a 3-way deal between Philly, Columbus, and LA. They gave up in total. What Columbus had to give up in order to do this is the first round pick in the 2023 draft that they actually required from LA in the Jonathan Quick trade. and then a conditional future second round pick and some prospects. That is how they acquired Ivan Provorov in the end. No notable departures, really. There were a lot of prospects that left Columbus, but there were no notable kind of roster players that left Columbus. That's really it with Columbus. And being a team that only had 59 points, was dead last in the conference, dead last in the division, of course, you would find it surprising that they would make so little moves. But what I will say is the biggest move of the offseason is really the quote unquote addition of Zach Werenski back into the lineup. He missed all of last season. He will be back, and he's going to be paired. He's going to be on the left side with Damon Severson on the right. You have Provorov then as your second left D man with Peak, and that's a very good top four, in my opinion. I think that's a pretty sneaky, underrated top four in this league. And then Adam Fantilli for now is going to be that second line center under Boone Jenner as the first line center. But your top six is kind of decent in its own right. You have Gaudreau and Line, of course, winging Jenner on the top line. And then Fantilli will be centering Kent Johnson and Kirill Marchenko. Hopefully I said that right. Kirill Marchenko. I think Marchenko's got a little bit of game to him, and Kent Johnson's actually not too bad himself. I think this team, when it comes to its skaters, is a decent team. I think they can at least, they're not going to be world beaters, but the blue line's 10 times better than what it looked like last season, especially as they were losing games and were without Werenski. Man, that is a tongue twister right there. But overall, it's like they should be a better team, and their downfall ultimately to me is their goaltending. When Elvis Merzlikins is your number one, and it's not like he's absolute dog water, but it's if he's not anyone that jumps out to me as a guy who can consistently take over games, and he's not really that. And Daniil Tarasov is Tarasov, yeah, I think it's Tarasov, is your backup. It's not like he's someone that you're hoping can step in and win you a bunch of games himself. I think the Blue Jackets are in a situation now where they're similar to the Sabres of last season or 2 years ago. Now, I'll say more 2 years ago, where they have pieces, they're trying to build something, they have things where they should be able to be competitive or at least entertaining night in, night out. But I don't necessarily think that'll still equate to wins. What I will say is you definitely can't sleep on this team. I think you cannot go into nights with Columbus. I mean, you couldn't even do that last year when they were essentially trying to tank at that point. And the Sabres found out they will still beat you on any given night. We lost to them on some random Tuesday at home, allowing 5 or 6 goals to them. And it was just a disaster. That was when it really felt like it was getting to the end. I believe it was losing to Columbus. And then a couple nights later, letting Dallas put up a 10-piece in your house. And it felt like the sky was falling. But, and the door was shut on playoffs at that time too. But then of course it wasn't. Crazy end of the season last season, if anyone out there can't remember. But Columbus should be a fun one, at least an interesting team to watch. And I think the future is somewhat promising for them. It's just goaltending right now for them is an ultimate downfall. And they still are just a few pieces away from being a team that should at least be competitive for something in the playoffs and things like that. Not concerned with them when the Sabres, as long as the Sabres show up and play their game and understand who they are, they should be able to take them in all meetings in front of them. But as I just mentioned, you can't take them lightly. And we have already seen that they lost to this Columbus team, even as Columbus was trying to half tank. So overall, the Sabres stack up well against them, and they will be seeing them for the first time this season, not until Tuesday, December 19th at home. That will be when we get the first look there. If, both teams are full health, I would expect the Sabres to win that game, but once again, it is a Tuesday night. Hopefully, Sabres fans show up. Hopefully, there's something exciting there for Sabres fans to fill the barn, unlike last year where it was getting pretty empty and stuff like that. I remember that Columbus game. One of the big notes I had and one of the big takeaways I had was in overall in the season, they were better on the road than at home. And it was like they could feed off the energy on the road better than they could at their home. Maybe hopefully by that time they can feed off energy at home and not have to worry about, kind of putting in lackluster performances against lesser teams such as the Blue Jackets. But I don't hate the Blue Jackets. I think they're moving the right direction. I think things are well. They're just still a little bit off from making the playoffs or being competitive in that regard. I have them around the 30 to 35 win mark. They had 25 wins last season. So that's still improvement. I do think they've improved their roster. And that, like I said, the biggest improvement they got is getting back their key guy in Zach Werenski. They should be a fun team to watch. a team that will be competitive, of course, and bouncing into it. When it comes to alphabetical, by the way, with the Metropolitan, when you have 3 teams that start with new, 2 teams that start with a P themselves, you really got to dive deep into which comes first. But if you are following along here, the next team coming up here is the New Jersey Devils. They finished second in their division, third in the conference overall with 112 points, just missed out on that division win by a single point to the Carolina Hurricanes. An interesting offseason ahead here. Arrivals wise, they bring in Tyler Toffoli, the right winger, traded from Calgary for Igor, hopefully I'm saying this right, Sherganovich, and a 2023 third. I apologize if I said that name wrong. They also bring in left winger Thomas Nosek via free agency from Boston, just on a 1-year, $1 million contract. And then also traded for defenseman Colin Miller from Dallas for a 2025 fifth. Essentially, Dallas needed to get rid of them, and they needed to bring in a defenseman. Colin Miller's probably going to be more like their 7th defenseman, but overall, bring in Colin Miller for on the cheap, essentially, just to get him off the books with Dallas. Departures, Mackenzie Blackwood, the goaltender, was traded to San Jose for a 2023 sixth. Left winger Miles Wood, which I think is the biggest departure for the New Jersey Devils. He left via free agency to go to the Colorado Avalanche, another guy that I kind of circled for free agency. If you did not watch that episode previously before free agency started, another guy I really liked, and I do like his game a lot as a bottom 6 forward. I think he's a premier bottom 6 forward. He's a premier 4th liner for sure in this league and brings a lot to that aspect of the game. Also lost defenseman Ryan Graves via free agency to Pittsburgh. We'll be mentioning him again later on. Defenseman Damon Severson, of course, I mentioned, was traded to the Blue Jackets. And then left winger Thomas Tatar. He is still a free agent. It's currently rumored that he might be on his way to Pittsburgh, but that is still not confirmed. He has not signed anything at this point in time, but he looks to no longer be part of the Devils. It's easy to look at this team and just think they have the potential to keep expanding on the success of last season. Like I said, they were 1 point off from winning the division. They were a very entertaining team. They are far away from the days of which they were running the trap and winning 1-0 games on the shoulders of Marty Brodeur and things of that nature. Of course, headlined by the explosion of Jack Hughes, essentially 1 point away himself from glory. That was 100 points. He finished with 99 points on the season, but he has officially reached the ranks of superstar and the potential that he has had all this time. But depth scoring is still something that I look at with this team, and I wonder where it's going to come from. I think it's Jack Hughes and then everybody else. I do think Timo Meier can easily get himself into the top scoring, of course, but that still is remaining to be seen. I felt like while watching him with New Jersey, he was still good, but he wasn't great. He wasn't the San Jose Timo Meier that we had come to see. He kind of fit more into the system, the Lindy Ruff system out there, and he wasn't really putting the puck in the net as freely as he was in San Jose. I do think he can do that, though. I'm not hating on him. Maybe it was just an adjustment period, and now that he's kind of locked and loaded with New Jersey for the foreseeable future, he will get back to his scoring ways. But then after him, it's like, Jesper Bratt's the next name that comes to mind. Like Nico Hirscher, in his defense, is just not that kind of guy. I think Jesper Bratt is where they go. They go and, of course, trade for Tyler Toffoli. I think that's a great acquisition. It's funny. If you look at their projected lines right now, I love looking at Daily Faceoff for projected lines. I think it just gives you a really nice general picture. Shout out Daily Faceoff. I think you guys do a great job. They actually have the top line is Nico Hirscher with Timo Meier on the left and Dawson Mercer on the right. And then the second line being Jack Hughes centering Jesper Bratt on the left and Tyler Toffoli on the right. To me, the top line actually is Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt, and Tyler Toffoli. I think that is the highest potential line for sure. But that top 6 is still good. Where it kind of falls off is Eric Haula, a guy that I personally do like a lot. I just don't see a lot of offensive production out of him. He's kind of a grinder, speedy center, bottom 6 center with Andre Palat, who's, he's good. He's maybe a 20 goal scorer for you on a good season. And then Alex Holtz, Curtis Lazar, Michael McLeod, Nathan Bastian. It's like, if that's your projected lineup, I mean, you have to lean so heavily on Jack Hughes, Tyler Toffoli, Timo Meyer. Like those are your three key guys to me. Jasper Bratt should be able to put in a great year again. Hopefully he keeps moving. He got a big deal from the Devils, I believe, this past offseason as well. I didn't write that down, but I'm almost positive that did happen. It's just there's a lot of question marks. And then I mentioned it also with this team. Miles Wood leaving, I think is going to be a massive, massive deal. I think Miles Wood, when you read that fourth line, when I would looking down here right now, reading this fourth line, Curtis Lazar, Michael McLeod, Nathan Bastian, all decent fourth liners. They're not Miles Wood. There's nothing that comes close to Miles Wood, in my opinion, comparatively to those guys. I think Curtis Lazar is not a bad fourth liner whatsoever. He does great on the penalty kill as well. I think he's a good player in his own right. He's just not Miles Wood, production wise. So I am very curious to see how that bottom six operates, because New Jersey, what I think would always bring them over the top, especially in Sabres games and things like that, was the presence of a Miles Wood on those bottom lines. And they could get scoring out of Miles Wood, because then when you took Miles Wood on that fourth line, let's say, and then put it up against the Sabres fourth line, or if they could get the matchup game right, if they're at home and get that against the third line of the Sabres, it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. So I'm very curious to see how that goes with the Devils. That's kind of my wild card for them. Overall, though, they are not going to be a wild card team. I do see them still being a 2 or 3 spot in the Metro, around 45 to 50 wins. That should be where they are. I think they should still be a successful team in this league. They are still going to be very competitive. I think the Sabres should be able to handle the Devils. I think those bottom 6 forwards, which I thought was kind of the thing that put them over the top, and the reasons why I like, for instance, Carolina, I think does a great job. When you're playing those third and fourth lines, they give you nightmares at times. I'm very curious to see how it operates with New Jersey. I think Lindy Ruff runs a great system in his own right. I think he does a great job when it comes to a team game and all of that. But I just don't see the bodies and the individuals that are out there skating as threatening as the Carolina Hurricanes, or say the Boston Bruins of last year, things like that, where it's like the depth is just so great on how they can attack you that eventually the Sabres become overwhelmed. So I expect the Sabres to be very competitive with this New Jersey Devils team. The first time we will see this New Jersey Devil team will actually be fairly early on in the season. We will see them on Friday, October 24th at New Jersey. I will be fascinated by that game. That game is one that I will be very, very interested in. I will be very intrigued by how the Sabres stack up against the New Jersey Devils. That will be something to watch for sure. A team in a game that I will not be looking forward to, if it wasn't for the fact of when it's being played the first time at least, is the New York Islanders. They are next on this list. The New York Islanders last year finished 4th in the division, 7th in the conference, were in a wild card spot. I believe I wrote that down right. Trying to do the math here. Yeah, they were in a wild card spot. Geez, I don't know why I questioned that for a second. My apologies. The arrivals and departures, though, and then this offseason, when it comes to off seasons, excluding the West, because I haven't dove deep into the West. I don't believe I will for the sake of this podcast. But when it comes to the Eastern Conference, the most interesting offseason when it comes to questionable, or just I question what is going on. Arrivals, there was one notable to me. It was right winger Julian Gauthier, free agent from Ottawa, 2-year, $1.575 million contract. He just seems like the only guy, based on their moves made, that will be making the roster, we'll call it. The departures, left winger Josh Bailey was traded to Chicago for future considerations, aka was just traded for nothing because they needed to get him off the books. And he was inevitably bought out by the Blackhawks. He's currently still a unrestricted free agent. Right winger Richard Panik, he is still an unrestricted free agent. And then left winger Zach Parise, who is also still an unrestricted free agent. So basically, they just let people walk, if not trade them to get them off the books. This is where it gets interesting, and I just have so many questions. I like, if I could ask the Islanders front office, if I could ask what the heck is going on, if I could ask Lou Lamoriello, what the hell are you doing? I would love the chance and opportunity to, because I'm just going to point out two things that they also did this offseason that just raised so many questions to me. And it's two questions or two things is two players. Okay. Left winger Pierre Engvall. They gave a 7-year, $24.5 million contract extension to. That is $3.5 million annual. He had a career year last season. So to give him a 7-year contract makes sense off of a career year if you just take those two variables. It was his first year with the team also. So I guess they're excited. They're excited about 17 goals, 13 assists, 30 points as a 27-year-old. Interesting. Pierre Engvall is not exactly someone that jumps off the page to me. He's a third liner for this team, locking him in on a 7-year deal at 3.5 a year. The number's not outrageous. It's just very strange to lock in a guy like that for 7 years. Another 7-year contract that is even more kind of a head scratcher to me in a way is defenseman Scott Mayfield. 7 years, 21 mil, 3 years of annual. 3 mil annual, 3 years manual, 3 mil annual. He also technically had a career year last year. 10th with the team. He's been with the team his entire career. 6 goals, 18 assists, 24 points and a +8. He is 31 years old early on in this season. 7-year, $21 million contract. Okay. He is also a third line defenseman. You have just locked these two guys up for 7 years. You go and sign, Julien Gauthier, whatever you want to call him. I don't even know if Julien will make the team. He's just a noteworthy player. He did play some meaningful games for the Senators last year. But they really didn't make a whole lot of moves. And then when you really peek under the hood with this team, and you have to deal with 2 more years of 33-year-old Anders Lee at $7 million a year with a no trade clause. And they just gave Bo Horvat an 8-year, $8.5 million annual contract at, I believe, 28 years old, 27, 28 years old. No, he's in his late 20s. There's really not much more you can do. You also have Matt Barzal, deservingly has around 9.5 annual. I don't know how many years he has left on his term, but he is a superstar. He just needs to stay healthy. I think Matt Barzal's phenomenal, of course. But you have Bo Horvat, who great player, 8 years at 8.5 mil. That's a good chunk of change. Anders Lee still at 7 mil is a struggle. And you're going to have to lean on Anders Lee for top 6 stuff. You still have Kyle Palmieri. You still have Brock Nelson. These are your top 6 guys. So realistically, this team scoring has to come, in my mind, from 2 guys. Matt Barzal on the wing of Bo Horvat. Those are your 2 guys. Everyone else on this team, like you go down this, Pierre Engvall, who I mentioned, Jean-Gabriel Pageau, Hudson Fasching. Sabres fans know who Hudson Fasching is. This guy has somehow solidified a third line winger position with the team. I thought he did play well for them, but he's not super noteworthy. It's not like he's going to get you 20 goals a season. Matt Martin, Cizikas, and Cal Clutterbuck are your fourth line. Like, this is a grind of a team. This is an uninspiring team to me. And it's like you are relying solely on the freakish abilities of Ilya Sorokin. Geez, I am mispronouncing names left and right. I do apologize. Ilya Sorokin to just get you through 1-0, 2-1 games. That is what this team is built for. And they're just going to grind you to death. I talked about New Jersey being far away from their New Jersey trap days. That is what the Islanders should be like, bringing in Brodeur to teach them the ways of the force kind of deal. It's like, that is how they're going to have to win games. I don't see them having a lot of scoring. They're going to be a very boring team to watch, in my opinion. Just a hard watch. My prediction for them, they're going to be in the fight for the wild card. I don't find anything about this roster inspiring. If Barzal gets hurt again like he did last season, I think they're in deep trouble. Overall, it's a tough team to look at roster-wise. Tough offseason where I just don't understand what the direction is for this team, and really laying down some questionable contracts as on top of it all. Around the 40 wins at best mark, fighting for a wild card, like I said. The first time the Sabres are up against them is actually the second game of the season, is Saturday, October 14th on the island at the Islanders. Um, like I said, if it wasn't for the fact of the matter of when this game is, and of course, just naturally being excited for the season going, um, I don't know if I'd be over the moon excited when it comes to wanting to watch this game. I think the Islanders will be a boring watch, and I think the Sabres should be able to handle the Islanders. I mean, it's great goaltending. Sorokin is one of, if not the best goaltender in the league. I think he is just so impressive as a goaltender. I would drool over having him on the Sabres. He's a top 3 goalie for sure in the league. Um, and he carries this team all the time. He carries the Islanders all the time, but it's the Sabres should be able to handle the Islanders. They have the scoring to just do whatever they need to do to get over the line. And they have bodies hopefully that have grown into themselves another year, being a young team, of course, getting a little bit older now. The Sabres are. Let's keep up with the physicality of the Islanders, keep up with this team. I don't think they have the legs like the Sabres do. And then you finally just get by them and grind them out to get the results you need to get to from them. So I expect the Sabres to be a better team than the Islanders overall. They should be able to beat them every game. I'm not saying they will beat them every night, but they should be able to. They stack up well against this Islanders team. Talking about the second game of the season, let's talk about a team they will be facing in the home opener. Spoiler alert, we're going to talk about the New York Rangers, a team that is very eventful in my household. Peek beyond the curtain here. Of course, my wife's and her family's favorite team. They root for them. Um, I'm going to be respectful to the Rangers. I will just say, we'll get into it here, but I do think they have a solid team. The arrivals, very active offseason for this team. That is absolutely for sure. Arrivals, you have right winger Blake Wheeler, free agency from Winnipeg, 1 year, $800,000 contract, basically vet min. Defenseman Eric Gustafson, free agent from Toronto, 1 year, $825K. You have goaltender Jonathan Quick. He came over from Vegas. Obviously, everyone knows him from LA, but he was on Vegas when they won the cup. He went to Columbus and then lived there for all of about an hour, then was traded to Vegas, gets to sit on the bench and just be in the organization to win a cup and he now signed with the Rangers on a 1 year, $825K contract himself. Right winger Alex Bezil, free agency via Montreal, 2 year, $1.5 million contract. Center Nick Bonino, previously of Pittsburgh, came in from free agency, 1 year, 800,000. And then right winger Tyler Pitlick, free agent as well from St. Louis on a 1 year, $787K contract. I believe that is the Vetmin number, or they just really chose a random number. I'm pretty sure that's the Vetmin though. A lot of Vetmin kind of bodies when it comes to their arrivals and contract situation. And that was probably because they already have money tied up elsewhere. And then they tried to go the fancy route. And their notable departures are, of course, right winger Patrick Kane. He is still a free agent at this moment in time. Right winger, I thought he was a left winger. I might have just wrote it down wrong. Winger Vladimir Tarasenko. He left via free agency to go to Ottawa. Defenseman Nico Mikola, he left in free agency to go to Florida. Center Tyler Mott, he is still an unrestricted free agent himself. And then I haven't noted here, left winger Alexis Lafreniere is still currently a restricted free agent at this moment in time. He is probably going to have a deal done soon. It's just a noteworthy thing. He should still be on the roster come day one of the season, but just something to note and monitor with this team. A lot of turnover. There's a lot of turnover with this team. Obviously, I just named a lot of names, but at the same time, this team feels no different than last year. And I'll get into that. It's like they bring in Blake Wheeler, and he's going to have to play top 6 minutes on the right wing, where they kind of have Kane last year after the trade deadline. They had him on the second line wing, I believe, if they shuffled things around. So I'm not sure where everything stood, but I'm pretty sure Kane was there. You got Blake Wheeler. I think he's going to be a different, obviously, player than Kane, but bring a different element that's not necessarily bad for this team. Eric Gustafson's going to have to play some time. Jonathan Quick is probably going to be their mainstay backup behind the man himself, that is Igor Shesterkin. Belzile, Nick Bonino, Tyler Pitlick. Those are going to be guys competing for the bottom six or fourth line for that matter. I believe Bonino's probably going to be their fourth line center, and then you look at Pitlick and Belzile; they'll be fighting to be kind of on the game day roster in that fourth line. Um, it's interesting because you have a lot of those guys, but then you look at this roster and they still have Zibanejad, they still have Kreider, they still have Panarin, Trocheck. The top four of their blue line is still very impressive, headlined by, of course, Adam Fox. It's a very good roster and they still have the core. They still have the group. I mentioned Shesterkin is, of course, still there. He's a year now, 2 years removed from his Vezina season. He won it 2 seasons ago. He dropped off last year. You'd expect him to come back and bounce back next season. A very, very good team. I don't see, as long as they stay healthy, I don't see a way that this team doesn't compete for a playoffs, of course, and then shouldn't be competitive every night and kind of pushing in the playoffs to make a little bit of a run themselves. I this team, just to get into the prediction here, is either the premier wild card teams, meaning they're the number one and they're probably by some distance, or they even are the 3 spot in the Metro with around 45 wins. It's just kind of where this team feels right. They're going to be a playoff team. They're going to be everything. This is also a team getting into it that I think the Sabres stack up with. I think when it comes to the Rangers, it's what makes, getting, here we go. First time the Sabres play them, of course, is the home opener, the season opener on Thursday, October 12th. That game will be just hype on hype. It's going to be so fun to watch this Sabres team against the Rangers team because there's just I think they stack up well. I think these two teams are kind of alike in a way. I think just they go punch for punch with each other. I think between the Rangers and the Sabres, sorry, I'm just looking up one thing that I want to bring up to while talking about the Rangers. But I think they just go on the ice with skaters. They go punch for punch. I think the separator when it comes to the Rangers, of course, is goaltending. They have a guy that they can lean on when needed. The Sabres is more of a question mark. They have Devin Levi, who is exciting, but at the same time, it's not like we have any known with him, stuff like that. The, where the Rangers are fascinating to me and what makes it very interesting with the Sabres, of course, is the fact that I think the biggest mistake when it comes to the Sabres this past offseason was letting a guy like Michael Pekka walk. And he goes and is now an assistant coach with these said New York Rangers. And that opening night is going to be fascinating because I think Michael Pekka, he had to do what's best for him in his career and everything like that. But I imagine at some point he was hoping that he'd be able to come up through the ranks within the Sabres organization and be part of the coaching staff within the Sabres. And for whatever reason, they just kind of let him walk out of the organization and go to somewhere else within I mean, it's to the Rangers, so it's not in your division, but it's still in your conference. I think that could be a massive mistake, we'll just call it, by the Sabres. I think what he had been doing in Rochester was very impressive with the development and everything like that. I think he was a great coach down there. He's done a lot of great things for the Sabres organization as a whole while in his coaching position and what he was doing in, kind of within the organization. Fascinating to see, just a note to be made. But that opening night against the Rangers is going to be all eyes, of course. Sorry, just taking a drink there. All eyes. I will be there. I will be there with my wife. I will be there with friends as well. Exciting times. Can't wait for that game to get here soon enough. Again, one more time. Home opener Thursday, October 12th. Sabres against the Rangers. It will be a fun time. The Rangers are a fascinating team where they're still the same thing, but they also had a lot of turnover. So still some question marks and curious to see how that will go. A team that has question marks, but not really, but it is just kind of the opposite of what we're talking about when it comes to being hyped about. That is next here is the Philadelphia Flyers. They finished last season 7th in the division, 14th in the conference with 75 points. This is kind of dreadful, and this is going to be a sad thing. I don't want to spend too much time on the Philadelphia Flyers because it's quite simple what their offseason's been like and kind of what is going on there. Our rivals, right winger Garnet Hathaway, he came from Boston via free agency on a 2-year, $4.75 million contract. Defenseman Mark Stahl came up from Florida in free agency on a 1-year, $1.1 million contract. Center Ryan Poling came in free agency from Pittsburgh, 1 year, 1.4 million. And then goaltender Cal Peterson was acquired in part of a three-way trade that we mentioned earlier involving LA and Columbus. Cal Peterson now is part of their goaltending rotation. Sabres legend hashtag. No, I'm just kidding. Departures. Ivan Provorov, we mentioned the defenseman, traded to Columbus. He was part of that three-way trade as well. Left winger James Van Riemsdyk, he left in free agency to go to Boston. Center Kevin Hayes was traded to St. Louis for a 2024 sixth. And right winger Brandon Lemieux left via free agency to go to Carolina. Just again, a noteworthy, he's played NHL, he's been around the NHL, stuff like that. Look, the bottom line with Philadelphia is simple. They are in a rebuild and they are in dark times right now. They are fully blowing things up. It looks like they are going to go into the depths of the darkness that is a rebuild and try to get themselves out of it. They restructured the front office. It's now headlined by Sabres legend, not tongue in cheek, Sabres legend Daniel Briere, also Flyers legend, of course. Sadness. And Briere has a lot of work cut out for him. He's got to do a lot of things. What I find fascinating though is on another podcast, After the Whistle, an individual was interviewed. I don't know why I'm blanking on his name right now. That is crazy. I apologize. I need to see it in front of me to smack myself in the face. Yeah. Delorier. Wow. Good job by me. Nick Delorier was on After the Whistle, and he mentioned how Daniel Briere has a relationship with players in the locker room and stuff that he viewed as good and healthy and positive overall. And what I loved hearing about that is Danny Briere clearly has an understanding of what's in front of him and what he needs to do to succeed. And Delorier can see that and sense that in him. And there's still more things to come with this roster, and there's going to be dark times. But he understands the big picture of the league and these players that are currently there and what needs to happen and so on and so forth. So it's easy for players like Delorier to kind of help Briere out and kind of just kind of be friendly with him and stuff like that, just because it's a GM going through a rebuild and things are going to be tough. Overall, though, this team is going to be brutal, absolutely brutal to watch. I imagine they're a prediction for me, a bottom three team in the league, around 25 wins. That's where Columbus was last year, for instance. They are just not an impressive team whatsoever. I don't see how this team is successful in any capacity, of course, and that's by design. So how do the Sabres stack up against them real quick? Very, very well. The Sabres should not be losing these games. Like we kind of talked about, though, in a sense, look, you can lose to a team any given night. And this, I would imagine the Flyers are going to play tough. They are coached by a hard ass and stuff like that. They're going to want to play hard night in, night out. The first time they actually play them as well, when it comes to the Sabres, is a home and home. The first, I forgot to write it down in my notes, so I had to look it up real quick. The first time they will be facing them is Wednesday, November 1st at Philadelphia. 2 nights later will be Friday, November 3rd, of which they are hosting the Flyers. So it's interesting to get 2 of those games out of the way. And early on in the season, when they're still motivated, honestly, that's not the greatest time to be playing them. I wish they were more stacked on the back end of the schedule, but it doesn't matter when the game is being played. Overall, the Sabres should be able to handle the Flyers and whatnot based on the roster moves and things like that. Another team based on the roster moves that I can't necessarily share that same sentiment with, that I am talking about next year, is the Pittsburgh Penguins. And this went from okay offseason to holy bleeping bleep offseason. They have headlined the headlines of the offseason. The Pittsburgh Penguins are quite literally the reason I kind of tipped the scale and was like, I have to do an episode about this. I was already planning on doing it, but then even in the time of which between the last episode and this one, I was like, now I have to do one. I can't bury the lead here. The biggest move to have happen this offseason in the entire league happened involving the Pittsburgh Penguins, and they acquired the biggest thing in that. And that was a trade, a 3-way trade between the Penguins, the San Jose Sharks, and the Montreal Canadiens, where they acquired Erik Karlsson and all $11.5 million of his annual contract somehow, some way. that it involved with Pittsburgh, their first, which then went to San Jose, a 2025 fifth, well, conditional second, I mean, that went to Montreal, and then a bunch of players. And I will get into those. Another thing that they received in this of involving a bunch of players was center Rem Pitlick. More arrivals though. And then I'll get back into the trade here. I'll do the arrivals and departures real quick. They acquired left winger Riley Smith, who was traded from Vegas for a 2024 third. Defenseman Ryan Graves, they acquired in free agency from New Jersey on a 6-year, $27 million contract. Center Noel Arcari, who they got from Toronto in free agency on a 3-year, $6 million contract. Center Lars Eller, free agency from Colorado, 2 years, $4.9 million. Left winger Matt Nieto, free agent from Colorado, 2-year, $1.8 million contract. Goaltender Alex Nelkovich, I think I said that right. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Free agent from Detroit, 1 year, $1.5 million contract. And just a fun little noteworthy one. I didn't even write down the contract detail from it, but Vinny Hinostroza did sign in free agency from our Buffalo Sabres. He is now part of the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. I believe it was probably like a 1 year, $800K contract, 2-way contract as well, potentially. Departures, I'm going to do the non-trade related ones, and then I'll do the trade related ones. So then I can go right back into that whole situation. Left winger Jason Zucker left in free agency to Anaheim. Defenseman Dmitry Kulikov left in free agency to go to Florida. Center Nick Bonino, who I mentioned earlier, free agent to the Rangers. Right winger Josh Archibald went to Tampa Bay in free agency. And then center Ryan Poling, who I also just mentioned when talking about Philly, he left in free agency to go to Philly. Now into the trade things, the people that left and how the Erik Karlsson trade in its brilliance worked. They traded center Mikael Granlund to San Jose. I think it's Mikael, or it's probably just Michael, but Granlund to San Jose. Defenseman Jeff Petrie, they traded to Montreal. Defenseman Jan Ruta went to San Jose as well. And then goaltender, who was back up for Pittsburgh in Casey DeSmith, UNH alum, shout out UNH. He went to Montreal himself. The Erik Karlsson trade is something that, look, as a Sabres fan, I hate seeing, because it's another team in the East that has just bolstered their lineup and gotten hella better. But if I pull off my fan sunglasses and I look at that trade for what it is as just a hockey fan, it is something that I absolutely love. I love what the Penguins did. And the Penguins recognized, especially after last season, especially after missing the playoffs in such brutal fashion. You cannot get blown out at home in a must-win game against the Chicago Blackhawks, the tanking Chicago Blackhawks. It's been beaten to death. It's been talked about left and right. But you cannot lose at home in that situation when the playoffs are on the line. Florida Panthers, thank you so much for then allowing them to have their magical run. So that happens. You change the front office. You bring in a hockey, president of hockey. And immediately it's like, we have Sidney Crosby, we have Evgeny Malkin, we have, Chris Letang. What can we do to try to squeeze out the last remnants and like everything you have to get one more cup run? Hey, you know what? Let's make the money work. Let's make it everything work. Let's do this crazy trade to get deals like Mikael Granlund, whatever your name is, off of our books for the amount of money that he was getting to kind of be a very unsuccessful signing, we'll call it, or unsuccessful acquisition for this organization. Get him off the books. Let him go to San Jose, where he can just waste the rest of his career away, as they are in a massive rebuild themselves. So that you free up that Petrie gets off, who's been a disappointment for them. You do all of these things and you bring in the reigning Norris winner, Erik Karlsson, who is going to be your second pairing right defenseman. That is just beautiful. That is going all in. You are trying to get your franchise player, Sidney Crosby. You can't say the best in the franchise. That's Mario, of course. But just keystone player, Sidney Crosby, franchise player, Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, another legend of the franchise, and then Chris Letang, another legend of the franchise, who's still on the back end of the career, almost at the twilight, I think more in Letang's sake. you're trying to get them one more good run, and you bring in just an unbelievable stud to really try to get it over the line and get another playoff push in. I love it. I love going all in. I love figuring it out when it seems like 11 and a half annual and just that contract is unobtainable. You figure out a way to make it work for your team and just make it happen for your team's most important assets. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I love it. It's an impressive move. I think the players they offloaded in order to make Erik Karlsson is just a chef's kiss of a move. And Pittsburgh's back, man. Pittsburgh, absolute. What the Erik Karlsson signing does too is they need Chris Letang, of course, to be healthy, along with Crosby and Malkin, naturally. But if for some reason Chris Letang gets hurt once again, who has been known to get banged up here and there and stuff like that, it just happens when with age and in such a physical game like hockey and stuff like that. But if that happens, there's not a massive drop off anymore on the blue line, at least for now. Then you have Erik Karlsson who just steps into that role, and it's as if Chris Letang never left and some. It's like what a beautiful, beautiful move that is, and just allows for so much potential with this roster. They are back. They are back to the playoffs. I project them to be around a 45-ish win team. They should be competing similar to like the Rangers for that like wild card 3 spot. I imagine those two will be battling it off. It's like the reason I have the Rangers as a premier wild card 2-3 spot is quite literally because the Penguins should be in that race with them. That should take some points away from them, or at least just figure that out. It just seems like that balance is there overall. This matchup with the Penguins for the Sabres, first time that is happening is Saturday, November 11th at Pittsburgh. What a game that will be. If they're at full health, definitely going to see how the Sabres match up against a now hype team with Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Karlsson. I mean, you still got Gensel, Ricard Raquel, Riley Smith, by the way, an acquisition which Vegas just had to get him off the books in order to get their books right. That could be a very underrated signing for them to put on the left of Malkin. There's a lot to like about what they've done this offseason. I think they rebuilt their bottom six a ton. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on with this roster and a lot of good things with this roster. I think they'll be a much better team. They should be much more competitive in the Sabres game. That November 11th game at Pittsburgh, the first time they see them, will be a fascinating time to really see how they stack up against a team like the Penguins who are trying to make that last push. And the Sabres could be fighting for them with a wild card spot too. So big game. And I just love seeing teams the final note on this is I just love seeing teams go all in. I love seeing teams just go all in for their players, go all in for their guys, and try to make it happen as much as they can for them. And they'll figure out the issues that come on the back end later. They'll figure it out. They'll make it happen. They're doing it for you. They want you to win. And it should boost that locker room. It should boost everyone in there knowing that they are trying to do their very best up there, up top in the front office to get success down on the ice. So good on them and things like that. Pivoting from that and pivoting from trying to win a championship here, the last team within the Metro is a team that I don't think is trying to do something like that at all. And there's just one other objective that they have when it comes to what they exist for currently. That is the Washington Capitals. Last but certainly not least, your Washington Capitals. No, I'm just kidding. Your Buffalo Sabres is, of course, what we love to root for here at Sabres Chat. Thank you for watching and listening, by the way. But with the Washington Capitals, they finished last year 6th in the division, 13th in the conference with 80 points. They really were kind of the start of the fall off when it came to the playoff race. Them in Ottawa, we're in that 80, 81 point area. Our rivals on this team, left winger Max Pacioretty, came over from the Carolina Hurricanes, who we started this episode about. 1 year, $4 million via free agents. Via free agency. Defenseman Joel Edmondson was traded from Montreal for a 2024 third and 7th. He was also brought in. Departures, left winger Connor Sheary left in free agency to go to Tampa Bay. Right winger Connor Brown left to go to Edmonton. Center Craig Smith left to go to Dallas. And then left winger Carl Hagelin, who is probably going to be hanging him up at his age. I believe he's around 36 years old. He is still, though, technically an unrestricted free agent. This team is transitioning, as I mentioned, away from what it appears like is they're kind of transitioning away from hey, we're trying to compete for Stanley Cups and things like that. And it seems like the existence of this team is quite literally for one reason and one reason only. And that is to get the grade 8 Alexander Ovechkin over the line and finally breaking Gretzky's goal record. One of what seemed to be the quote unquote unbreakable records that 99 left in this league and in sports in general. They are doing it's I don't want to say they're doing everything they can. It's just that's the focus. It really feels like. What really put that over the line to me is when they didn't do a whole heck of a lot in this offseason when it came to bringing in youth and skill and things like that. They still have aging TJ Oshie. They bring in an older Max Pacioretty, still has some game in him, but an older Pacioretty. You have kind of nothing really there in the ranks kind of coming up. The blue line is still kind of John Carlson sitting there, Rasmus Sandin, things like that. It's like this roster isn't bad. It's just not going to do much for you. And then with the money that you have and things like that, you go and there's two sides to this. So and I'll get into that in a second. But you go and give Tom Wilson a 7-year, $45.5 million contract extension. That comes out to $6.5 million annual. Tom Wilson is a great player. He plays on this team's top line. He is very important on that top line as well, with Ovechkin and Kuznetsov. He's a very important player. He's been a very important player for the Capitals for a long time. That contract to me is rewarding him for kind of his intangibles and what he's done in the past, and not because what he can be in the future and stuff. Like $6.5 million is a lot of money for Tom Wilson. A lot of money to have locked in on Tom Wilson for the next 7 years. That's a big contract. And that to me was kind of we'll call it yellow flag. Not, I mean, it's the signal of, hey, we really just are all in on Ovechkin and his goal breaking record. And I think Tom Wilson signing that contract, Tom Wilson now is like, I want to be the guy who's the primary assist on the record breaking goal, or maybe Backstrom's going to be fighting to get back to his one center spot over Kuznetsov to center Ovechkin to make sure he gets that primary assist on the record breaking goal, which I don't believe comes next season. That comes in optimism the following season. Part of me, in a weird way, part of me really hopes it's against the Sabres, just because it'd be fun to what happened in a game where I really am focusing on. But that's clearly the point of emphasis for this team and what they are focused on the most moving forward. And do I blame the Capitals for this? No. Do I think it's smart? No. Uh, you should always be trying to be competitive and win and do whatever you can for your team to win and so on and so forth. But hey, if you want to do what you can for the face of your franchise, the best player in your franchise history, a guy who's trying to do something, as I said, quote unquote, break an unbreakable record that is the Wayne Gretzky goal scoring mark of the NHL, I'll give you kind of a pass. I'll let you do. You're gonna be suffering after that. It's gonna be maybe some dark times for Washington potentially, depending on what they do to turn things around. But yeah, interesting situation for the Capitals. First time that the Sabres will be playing the Capitals. Oh, prediction. Sorry, real quick. Prediction. I see them as 35 wins at best. Once again, they did hit the 35 win mark last season. That's where I think their ceiling is at best, and they will be missing out on the playoffs once again. First time. Dry throat. Apologize. First time the Sabres will be playing them is Wednesday, November 22nd at Washington. I expect the Sabres to be better than this team. I would hope that what we saw last against the Capitals when it comes to the Sabres doesn't happen, where you have a 2-goal lead in the third period and you let it slip. You can't be doing that if you are the Sabres moving forward, especially against the likes of the Capitals. Capitals have Ovechkin. Capitals have, guys who have proven they can put the puck in the net for years. I say that kind of on purpose the way I did. They are aging. TJ Oshie and company, those guys. It's like, look, if you can just kind of use your youth and speed to maintain, play against that team, you should be able to win those games. The Capitals should not be a problem for the Sabres. I'll say it again, though. Any given night, you never know. I'm not saying that they should win all games against the Capitals. It's just they should be able to handle the Capitals every night they come up against them. So I don't really see the Capitals being anything for the Sabres when it comes to competition over the season and playoffs naturally. And the few times they have to play them, they should be able to handle them fine. So that is the Metropolitan Division. Went at just about an hour here, if I'm looking at that correct. It's an interesting division to me. I think uh, it's kind of a division that fits where it is a little bit more so than the Atlantic. I think the Atlantic has a lot more questions on where teams stand. I think there's a lot of activity, movement, and stuff like that when it comes to the Atlantic comparatively to the Metro. I think the Metro is still Carolina is the cream of the crop. I think your next best are New Jersey, Rangers, and Pittsburgh. I think those all kind of shuffle in. I imagine New Jersey will most likely finish the two, but I could see the Rangers finishing the two, for instance, and then the Devils being the three, and Penguins being a premier wild card. I could see the Penguins squeaking in, and the Devils being a premier wild card. I think those three teams are kind of there. And then after that, this division is not good. Just not good. Like Columbus could be fun to watch, but overall not good. The Capitals, they exist to see Ovechkin put goals in the net. That's it. The Flyers are going to be brutal. The Islanders will be brutal to watch, but somehow still win games. The Flyers will be brutal to watch and continue to lose games by design. So this division is four teams that are very good and four teams that are not very good. So it's an interesting and yet not so interesting division. I hope you enjoyed this episode and everything like that. I appreciate you listening and or watching. If you are watching, be sure to hit the like button, comment below on how you feel about the Metropolitan Division, comment how you feel about the Sabres, say go Sabres, say anything. I love to reply back to people if they comment on these episodes. It's quite enjoying. I check up every once in a while. I will try to get back to you as much as I can. Likes go a long way. Subscribe if you have not already here at Built in Buffalo, or if you're watching on the Bills Chat channel that I post these episodes on as well. That is my own individual's brand channel. I appreciate you stopping by there as well if you found it via that channel. Yeah, appreciate these episodes. I appreciate you guys for listening and stuff like that. I hopefully will be back once again. We will figure out this stuff. Work schedule's getting a little busy, unfortunately. So figuring that one out. I'm not trying to do every other week and things like that. Once the season gets going, once we get, players reporting and preseason games underway, and then eventually regular season, these will be a weekly occurrence, of course. Just naturally more things to talk about, things like that. Hopefully they don't go an hour long. These are just divisional breakdowns, and there's 8 teams, 7 teams in the Atlantic sense, because I wasn't talking about the Sabres at that point. But these are longer breakdowns. I do apologize, but I do appreciate you sticking through this entire episode. I appreciate you stopping by and everything like that. My name is Luka. If you would like, I just realized this whole time I didn't have my name up. I do apologize. If you like, I popped it up here on video. Follow me on Twitter at Sabres Chat Pod, or me and my co-host Josh at Bills Chat Pod, where you can find all your Bills content. You all have a great rest of your day, night, morning, whatever it is that you have found me here. And you catch me next time on Sabres Chat, presented by Built in Buffalo. Have a great